While I recognize the role of the private sector, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that financing is not a replacement for funding. We saw this when, despite the fact that MAP 21, which I helped draft, increased the TIFIA financing program nearly tenfold, but it failed to address the central problem, which is a lack of adequate funding. And that fundamental problem isn't going to go away. We're going to have to work together and make some tough choices in order to find the revenue necessary to fully invest in 21st century infrastructure. And I hope we don't fall into the trap of taking legitimate options off the table, regardless of how unpopular they might seem at the moment. I know that there's been some talk in this body about the need to focus on financing rather than funding because the House has no appetite for revenue increases, but I don't think the Senate Finance Committee should be giving the House veto power over its work. There's a lot of support on this committee for investing in our infrastructure, and I would challenge the House at the end of the day as to where, in fact, they're willing to go as it relates to the critical infrastructure challenges we have in this country. I don't want to wait for the next bridge to collapse for them to come to an awakening of that need. And the private sector isn't going to choose their investments based on whether it will bail Congress out of a funding crisis, is good for the U.S. economy, and will benefit the society as a whole. They are going to choose their investments based on their financial interests. That's the essence of why they exist, and that's what they're supposed to do. So that's not going to cover every element of our transportation system, particularly if you're talking about smaller projects, if you're talking about rural projects or projects that preserve access for the elderly or disabled. So to that point, in a recent Banking Committee Transit Subcommittee, which I serve as a ranking member on, we heard testimony from Jane Garvey, who has held senior roles in both the public and private sector. And her testimony argued that if the only reason a public sector agency is considering a P3 is for financial reasons, it is probably not the right model. So, Mr. Bott, your state has a range of transportation challenges, highway and transit, rural and urban. Do you agree with Ms. Garvey's statement? Can private sector financing serve as a replacement for any of your state's funding needs?
Sir, I think the private sector plays an important role and a critical role. And in Colorado, over the next 20 years, we have about $1 billion a year shortfall in transportation investment that, we have projects. And these are not fluff projects. These are really good projects that could go. I think the challenge in transit is that transit doesn't pay for itself. When I was in Delaware, our fare box recovery is the metric that people look at, and it was around 20%, 20 cents on every dollar that we put in is what we get out. And lots of people point to that and say, look, transit doesn't pay, we shouldn't pay for it. But there are millions of people in this country who don't make a decision on how they get to their destination based on the choice of taking a car or taking transit. They rely on transit to get to jobs. So to me, I think that there needs to be a mix of private sector profit motive and government sense of what is a social responsibility in terms of providing for.
Well, I agree with you that the private sector is important. I started my prefatory comments in that regard. The question is fundamental, though. Can financing solve all of your transportation problems in your state?
No, because you need there has to be the profit motive in the transportation property to get out.
So you mentioned that Colorado is considering a public-private partnership for the viaduct along I-70. And you go on to say you don't expect the private sector partner to take on the toll risks. Given the Indiana toll road concession, where the private sector partner assumed the toll risk and ultimately went bankrupt, why would the state not seek to put more of the toll risk on the private sector?
So they're two very different projects. This is obviously the Indiana toll road, and I don't want to speak for Governor Daniels, but much longer, and the entire facility was tolled. This is a managed lane, so this is one lane in each direction that is being tolled, and it just doesn't throw off enough revenue. So in a $1.2 billion project, the state and local partners are putting in, I want to say, $900 million of that.
Yeah. So the bottom line is there's not enough potential profit in order for a private sector to come in.
Only if you toll the entire facility, and that is just not allowed.
Right. And then finally, when the private sector invests in a project, they're rightly working to earn a return on investment. That's the very essence of what they do, and I applaud that. But the role of the public sector is much broader. It's more than getting people from point A to point B. It includes questions of access, equity, service quality for people of all incomes and all abilities. And so isn't that part of the factor that we have to put into these equations as it relates to how we're going to go ahead and achieve some of the transportation projects that are critical, whether it be for your state of Colorado or mine in New Jersey or others similarly situated?
Yes, in my opinion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.